John 18. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden into which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus had often met there with his disciples. Judas, having taken a detachment of soldiers and officials from the chief priests, officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. All right. And so what we have here is them going across the brook Kidron, which actually, if we go to Second Samuel, there's this whole thing in chapter 15 where Absalom is, which is David's son, is basically starting a coup against his own dad. And as we go along with this story, all this stuff, the servants go with him and who stays and who doesn't. But basically, the king also himself passed over the brook Kidron, right? And so what we have here is the most famous of Israel's kings crossing this brook on his way out of Jerusalem. And here Jesus is crossing the same brook, heading out from Jerusalem. Okay, so that's just a textual link back into this, okay? And now what we have here are these, this detachment of soldiers, which are probably not Roman soldiers. It's probably temple guard type people and that kind of thing. So we've got that going on here. And they've got their weapons and stuff. It's a mob, okay? Jesus, therefore, knowing all the things that were happening to him, went out and said to them, "Who are you looking for?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." This is directly, at least in the Greek translation, right? This is the exact same word for, I am, right? So this is the divine name. And what we see here is that Judas, who had betrayed him, was standing there. When therefore he said to them, "I am he, I am," they went backward and fell to the ground. And there's some other textual stuff that we could look into. It's just not really that important here, that basically saying the divine name and claiming it for himself, this is one of the closest that Jesus has to basically saying I'm God, right? And actually, if you watch the Bible Project on John, they point out a lot more of all this stuff. It's good. But what we have here, right, is this thing where by even acknowledging who he is, it has an effect on them. Again, therefore, he asked them, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered them, "I told you that I am he. If therefore you seek me, let these go their way, that the word might be fulfilled which he had spoke, of those whom you have given me, I have lost none." Simon Peter, therefore, taking a sword, drew it, struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus therefore said to Peter, "Put the sword into its sheath. The cup which the Father has given me, shall I not surely drink it?" And so Peter is like, "Oh, I see what's going on. We've got like a war on our hands. And I told Jesus I was going to stand up for him. I was willing to die. So let's get this battle started." And Jesus is like, "No, Peter, you still don't get it. You still don't get what's going on, man." And he actually heals the guy, right? And I like it. My pastor said that it's not likely that he was going for his ear. He's probably going for his head, and the man ducks, right? And so he gets his ear cut off, and Jesus fixes it. Okay, but he's talking about the cup, which could be a reference to divine wrath and that kind of stuff in the past. I don't know. That's just a thing that could be. All right. So the detachment, the commanding officer, and the officers of the Jews seized Jesus and bound him and led him to Annas first, for he was father-in-law to Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. Okay, and remember, we talked about this way back earlier when we first introduced ourselves to Caiaphas, when he said, this was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it was expedient that one man should perish for the people. So Annas was the one who was elected for life, but then Rome deposed him and then set up, here's this kid. Why is he here? What's he doing, right? Okay, and so this is just bringing that all up again. Simon Peter followed Jesus, as did another disciple. There's John self-inserting again. Now that disciple was known to the high priest and entered in with Jesus into the court of the high priest. But Peter was standing at the door outside, like the guy they was who didn't have access, right? So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to her who kept the door and brought in Peter. Then the maid who kept the door said to Peter, "Are you also one of this man's disciples?" He said, "I am not." Now, the servants and the officers were standing there, having made a fire of coals, for it was cold. They were warming themselves. Peter was there with them, standing and warming himself. And now we're starting to cut back and forth to get some exciting tension. Okay, and this is actually common in ancient Near Eastern literature as well as today with how we do stories. Okay. The high priest, therefore, asked Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Jesus answered him, I spoke openly to the world. I always taught in synagogues and in the temple where the Jews always meet. I said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard me what I said to them. Behold, they know the things which I said. When he said this, one of the officers standing by slapped Jesus with his hand, saying, Do you answer the high priest like that? Jesus answered him, If I have spoken evil, testify of the evil. But if well, why did you beat me? And so Jesus is basically like, did I say something wrong? Because I don't think so. And so Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Annas is like, okay, I'm not getting anywhere with this guy. We'll let the guy who's officially in charge deal with him. Okay. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. They said therefore to him, You aren't also one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, being a relative of him whose ear Peter had cut off, said, Didn't I see you in the garden with him? This is great, right? Because this is one of Malchus's relatives who was there watching Simon Peter chop off this guy's ear and then Jesus healing it. And the guy's like, I'm pretty sure I saw you there. Okay. You chopped off. Okay. Peter therefore denied it again, and immediately the rooster crowed. They led Jesus, therefore, from Caiaphas into the praetorium. And what's fun here is that we skip over whatever happened with Caiaphas. We just skip it. Okay. It was early, and they themselves didn't enter into the praetorium, that they might not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. Pilate therefore went out to them and said, What accusation do you bring against this man? They answered him, If this man weren't an evildoer, we wouldn't have delivered him up to you. Okay, so we have two things here. One of them is that the whole thing that they're doing with this trial is actually horribly illegal, and we covered that in Matthew. You can go back and watch those videos if you want. But they care deeply about their ability to have Passover, so they do want to keep themselves ritually pure. Who cares about the state of your heart, right? As long as you can do the religious trappings, we're good, right? Second thing is that, Pilate's like, so what's going on? And that's the most vague answer. Well, he's definitely a criminal. We wouldn't be bothering you otherwise. What? Okay, what not an answer. Pilate therefore said to them, okay, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. He's like, why are you bringing me into this? Therefore the Jews said to him, it is illegal for us to put anyone to death, that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what kind of death he should die. And here in John 12, he talks about, I'm going to be lifted up, and he signifies what kind of death he's going to die. Back then, okay, and because if this was a religious law thing, if this was according to the Jewish law, then he would be stoned to death. But they're saying we can't actually do what we want to do to him, so we're going to crucify, because it has to be that, right? Because we're crucifying instead of stoning, okay? So that's just a setup here, okay? Pilate therefore entered again into the praetorium, called Jesus, and said to him, Are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered him, Do you say this by yourself, or did others tell you about me? Are you the king? Who's saying? Pilate answered, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and chief priests delivered you to me. What have you done? He's like, what? I don't care. He's like, what's going on? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then my servants would fight, and I wouldn't be delivered to the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. Okay, so he's like, but we're not fighting. There's no revolution that's happening. Not at least one that's physical or, political. Pilate therefore said to him, Are you a king then? Jesus answered, You say that I am a king. For this reason I have been born, and for this reason I have come into the world, that I should testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth, listens to my voice. Pilate said to him, What is truth? Okay? And so Pilate's like, oh, okay, you're not a revolutionary. You're not somebody I need to worry about. You're a whack job philosopher who thinks that you understand truth and all that stuff. Cool. I don't care. Truly don't care at all. Okay? So when he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I find no basis for a charge against him. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Therefore, do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Okay, so Pilate's like, look, we do this thing where because it's a festival, I give you guys, one release, one get out of jail free card. So you want me to give it to this guy because there's literally no reason for us to kill him. Then they shouted again, saying, no, not this man, but Barabbas. Now, Barabbas was a robber, or some others say insurrectionist or something. But basically, the point is, Barabbas actually is a criminal, actually, potentially, has actually tried to, overthrow Rome. So if they actually cared about Rome, then they wouldn't be asking for this guy. Okay, so we got that going on. So Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, all right? The soldiers twisted thorns into a crown and put it on his head and dressed him in a purple garment. And it might not actually be purple, might have just been like a faded red one or something. Okay. They kept saying, Hail, King of the Jews. And they kept slapping him. Okay. And this is not the only record we have of Romans doing this. They're like, look, you think that you're going to be a king? Good luck with that. And hey, you're a king. We can slap you all we want. And also, there was also a point that this crown that they make isn't like a full crown. This is like a half crown, meaning that even if Jesus is going to pretend to be a king, he's going to be under Roman's boot. Okay, he's subservient to Caesar. Okay, that's the imagery that they're doing. Then Pilate went out again and said to them, Behold, I bring him out to you, that you may know that I find no basis for a charge against him. Jesus therefore came out, wearing the crown of thorns and the purple garment. Pilate said to them, Behold the man. Link back to when Israel had their first king, okay? And Samuel is going and he's trying to figure out where is this guy? What's it going to be and all that stuff. And Yahweh said to him, Behold the man. Okay. So we have that behold the man thing. Okay. So there we are. Another link to Kings. Okay. Back. So we had David, then we had Saul. So most famous and second as well as the first. Okay. When therefore the chief priests and the officers saw him, they shouted, saying, Crucify! Crucify! Again, contrasting between Saul, which they're like, give us a king. We want somebody who's going to fight wars for us. And here they're like, oh, this king, we want this one gone. Pilate said to them, Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jews answered him, We have a law, and by our law he ought to die, because he made himself the Son of God. When therefore Pilate heard this saying, he was even more afraid. And so what we have here is that Pilate goes from thinking, okay, Jesus is just this, whacked out philosopher guy who's just saying weird stuff, to now being like, wait a minute, Pilate believes in the multiple, the many different pantheon of gods, and you have demigods, you have all this stuff. So if this is one of those, then now we're messing with like the supernatural realm, and I don't want to mess with that. Okay, so now he's getting afraid. Okay, so he entered into the praetorium again and said to Jesus, Where are you from? But Jesus gave him no answer. Where are you from? Are you like from the supernatural world, dude? Like, do you have supernatural powers? And Jesus doesn't answer him. Pilate therefore said to him, Aren't you speaking to me? Don't you know that I have the power to release you and have the power to crucify you? Jesus answered, You would have no power at all against me, unless it were given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me to you has greater sin. At this, Pilate was seeking to release him. Okay, so Pilate's like, okay, if you're from above, okay. But the Jews cried out, saying, If you release this man, you aren't Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king speaks against Caesar. So now they're pulling the Caesar card, right? Like, if you're going to let a pretend king go, then Caesar's going to have your head. When Pilate, therefore, heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at the place called the Pavement, but in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the preparation day of the Passover at about the 6th hour. He said to the Jews, Behold your king. All right, and this goes Zechariah 9, right? Rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold your king comes to you. He is righteous, having salvation, lowly and right. So we've already actually seen this verse before, but now we have another link to that here with behold your king. Okay? And by the way, this note about the preparation day of the Passover, this just adds to the potential complexity of when did all these events actually take place. Because if this is a preparation day, then there's a special Sabbath. This is a Sabbath, or the one that's coming up is going to be a Sabbath, and there's a special Sabbath. And so all this could change the timeline. So it's not necessarily Friday to Sunday, and that's okay. Everything's okay. Maybe I'll make a video on that specifically. I think I've talked about it a little bit in the past, but the timeline of all this is in question, is in flux. We're not totally certain on everything. There's differing opinions. It's totally fine. It's fine if you want to celebrate Good Friday. It's okay. Not a problem. Just here's a thing that could be part of the weirdness that's going on in here. Okay. They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." And this is where John is just laying on the irony thick. And he has a lot of irony. We're not talking about a lot of it, but here, just the irony and the absurdity of this whole situation, right? Here we have the chief priests saying that the only king they have is Caesar, when the only king they should be having is God, especially considering that this is Passover, and this is about getting out from under the boot of Egypt. And so now we're looking forward to coming out from under the boot of Rome. And here they are saying, no, 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 we're happy here. All politically to try and get rid of Jesus, who is bringing about the second Exodus, right? So just crazy stuff going on with John. So then he delivered them to be crucified. So they took Jesus, and led him away. He went out bearing the cross to the place called the place of the skull, which is called in Hebrew Golgotha. I actually don't know how to pronounce any of these words, so I'm sorry. Where they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate wrote a title also, and put it on the cross. There was written, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Therefore many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. The chief priests and the Jews therefore said to Pilate, "Don't write the King of the Jews," but he said, "I am the King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." Okay. Like, Pilate is no longer going to mess with them. He's done. He's had enough, and he's now taking care of Jesus. So like, he doesn't need to worry about Caesar anymore. Okay, that's not a thing anymore. And this whole idea of Jesus carrying his cross, it's just the crossbeam part. Historically, you just carry the crossbeam. Also, since he was flogged, like that was messing him up. So like, he's not going to be carrying the whole thing. So they left the poles, the vertical poles there, and then they would lay him down and stick you on him and then get you back up there. Okay, so that's what's going on. And also, irony is that Pilate is claiming that Jesus is the King of the Jews. This, Roman guy, right, is doing it, right? Then the soldiers, when they had crucified him, took his garments and made 4 parts, to every soldier a part, and also the tunic. Now the tunic was without seam, woven from the top throughout. Then they said to one another, "Let's not tear it, but cast lots for it, to decide whose it will be." Then that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, "They parted my garments among them, they cast lots for my clothing." Therefore the soldiers did these things. This is from Psalm 22. And don't worry, we're coming back to this. Okay, so we have this and so we got these connections here. Okay, and therefore the soldiers did these things. Okay, and so Jesus had a fancy undergarment. Okay, it was just woven. It wasn't sewn from 2 pieces or whatever. It was just woven properly. Cool. Okay. But standing by Jesus' cross were his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Therefore, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing there, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." From that hour, the disciple took her to his home. And so this is culturally, you take care of your parents, right? That's what you do. And so Jesus is being a good son and making certain that even though he's dying, someone's going to take care of his mom. And that's this disciple, this is John, who's going to take care of Mary. And so you could use this as evidence that Jesus didn't have any other brothers and sisters, but that when we talk about that, we're talking about relatives, which the word could mean. So that's a point potentially for the Catholic view, possibly. Okay, here you go. All right, just giving that. All right. After this, Jesus, seeing that all things were now finished, that the scripture might be fulfilled, said, "I am thirsty." Okay, and that's here. Ruth So we're still in this Psalm 22 thing. Okay. Now a vessel full of vinegar was set there. So they put a sponge full of the vinegar on hyssop, and they held it at his mouth. When Jesus therefore had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." Then he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Okay, and hyssop comes from Exodus 22. Okay, and this is again Passover imagery. Okay, you shall take a bunch of hyssop, you shall dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and strike the lintel and the two doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. Okay, and so John uses this word hyssop, even though the hyssop plant probably isn't long enough for them to actually do it. It was probably a different plant, but John is tying us back to Passover because he wants to make this connection very clear. Passover, second Exodus, Jesus. Okay. Therefore, the Jews, because it was the preparation day, so that the bodies wouldn't remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a special one. There's that thing again about preparation day, Sabbath, special Sabbaths, all that stuff. Asked of Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. Okay, and this is from Deuteronomy. If you hang somebody on a tree, right, the cross kind of thing, his body shall not remain all night on the tree. Like that's the law. And so they're like, hey, look, we want to keep the law here, so can we just like hurry this along? Okay. Therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who was crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they didn't break his legs. However, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. He who is seen has testified, and his testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, that you may believe. For these things happened that the scripture might be fulfilled. A bone of him will not be broken. Again, another scripture says, they will look on him whom they have pierced. Okay, and so here we are going back to Exodus 12 here. 12, yep. And if you just scroll down this passage that we are already doing, okay, do not break any of its bones. Okay, so we have that passage, okay, but then we also have Psalm 34. Okay, he protects all of his bones; not one of them is broken. Okay, and so we've got this connections back to different scriptures and stuff like that with this. After these things, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jews, asked of Pilate that he might take away Jesus' body. Pilate gave him permission. He came therefore and took away his body. Nicodemus, who at first came to see Jesus at night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 Roman pounds, or I guess 75 pounds. Is that what it says down here? Yeah, 72 pounds, I guess. Okay, whatever. All right. So they took Jesus' body and bound it in linen, in linen cloths with the spices, as the custom of the Jews is to bury. All right. Now, in the place where the crucifixion, where he was crucified, there was a garden. In the garden was a new tomb in which no man had ever yet been laid. Then, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the tomb was near at hand, they laid Jesus there, setting up the garden thing that we were going to have there. Okay, and then I also wanted to point this out. Sorry, we have this thing about looking on those whom they have pierced. Okay, we have this thing from Zechariah 12. I will pour on David's house and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me whom they have pierced. Okay, and so this is God putting himself in the role of being pierced, and then Jesus gets pierced, and John's pulling that connection for us with all of this. Okay, so this is setting us up for the next thing that happens in the garden and all the things that are with that.